Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and I create knitting content here on YouTube. If you're new to my channel and like to see more, don't forget to subscribe down below. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through how to read a cable chart, and the project that we're going to be working on to learn how to knit out of a cable chart is going to be a hat. So the particular kind of cable chart that we're using is in the round. So you do knit cable charts differently when they're in the round versus flat. So in this video, we're only going to be working in the round. So this is an example of the hat we're going to be working on. I've actually made two different versions. So you'll see this first one has a folded brim that's sewn on the inside, and then the second one just has a simple brim, which is 1 inch wide. So you can choose either one to knit, and I'll show you, of course, the differences at the end. But yes, to start off in this video, we're going to do a long tail cast on. Then we're going to knit ribbing, so depending on which size you decide to knit. We're going to increase our needle size and also work some increases before we start the ribbing. Then we'll begin working the cable chart, and I'll demonstrate how to read a cable chart as well as what all the different symbols mean. So then we're going to work up through the cable chart, and we'll also work the decreases at the top and finally finish off. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Down in the description box below, you're going to find a couple of things. So the first thing you're going to find is going to be the written version of this pattern, as well as a link to the Ravelry project page. So that way, if you want to add your projects over there, feel free. You'll also find the different steps that I'm going to be using in this video. So for example, the cast on, the materials, increasing needle size. You'll find all those different video breakpoints. So that way you know if you just want to see a certain thing, you can fast forward to that location, or if you want to rewatch something, you know exactly where to go back to. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below, and let's get started. I'm going to start off by showing the materials we'll need to make this hat. So starting off with kind of the miscellaneous category, you're going to need a pair of scissors to break your yarn. You're going to need 6 stitch markers, and these are going to be basically to mark in between the cable repeats. So I have 5 that are all the same, and then I have 1 that's different, and the different one will mark my beginning of the round. You'll need a tapestry needle, and this will be to weave in your ends at the end. And also, if you want to create a folded brim and want to sew it inside, you can use a tapestry needle for that. And now lastly, the knitting needles. So first, we have a cable needle, and there's a lot of different types of cable needles you can buy. This is the one I like to use. So it just kind of has a little hook in the middle. And I got this at, I believe I got this at either AC Moore or Joann's. Now for my knitting needles, I'm going to knit this hat using magic loop. So I have a size US 7 and a US 8 interchangeable set. And then I have, my cord is about 24 inches here. So that way I can do magic loop. If you want a shorter or longer cord too, I've been doing magic loop for quite a long time, so it's pretty easy for me to use a shorter cord. But if you're new to magic loop, I would recommend you going all the way up to maybe like a 36 just to make the magic loop a little bit easier. But again, the 2 needle sizes you're going to need are a US 7 and a US 8. If you decide you don't want to do magic loop for this hat, I would recommend that you use a size US 7 16-inch circular needle, then use a size US 8 16-inch circular needle again. And then finally, you're going to need to use a different type of needle for your decreases. So I'd recommend then switching to US 8 double pointed needles. But in this tutorial, I'll be showing you with the magic loop. Now lastly, these 2 aren't included on the instruction sheet, but I would recommend that you print out the cable pattern as well as the symbols, so that way we can follow along in the tutorial. And I've also found it's really helpful to highlight the rows as I go along. So for example, once I finish this first cable row down here, I just highlight that off. That way my eyes know where to look on the chart as I'm going along. So I found that a highlighter is a great tool. Also, if you don't have a highlighter, using little post-it notes to cover up rows you've already done, or you can just take another piece of paper and slide it up as you go along. Those are all different variations. Lastly, for the yarn, in this tutorial, I'm going to be using Vanna's Choice by Lion brand, and this one's in a blue colorway. The main thing you're looking for if you're shopping at your local, like AC Moore or Joann's, is you want a medium weight yarn. So look for the number 4. If you're shopping at a local yarn shop, you'd want to look for a worsted weight yarn, so that'd be the equivalent of a 4. Yes, so in this tutorial I'm going to be using the Vanna's Choice, and this one has 170 yards, so that's plenty to knit this hat. And in the second version of the hat that I'll show at the end when I show how to do the double brim, I use this Heartland Line brand yarns. So again, you'll see this one has the 4 symbol, also medium weight yarn. So yes, now that I've shown you all the materials that are needed for this project, let's get started. The first step is going to be to cast on. So in this tutorial, I'll be showing you the long tail cast on method. To do the long tail cast on, you want to take out about 2 yards of your yarn, leave it attached though, and we're going to use this, and it's called the tail, and what it's attached to is called the working yarn. So whenever I have one of these, I don't want to say whenever, but most of the time I do pull from the center, just because I don't like how it jumps all around when I pull the yarn out of it. So I am pulling from the center. And the first step is going to be to create a slip knot right in the middle. So we have our 2-yard tail over here, and then our working yarn. So to create a slip knot, I'm going to lay the yarn over my hand. So I have the working yarn coming out the top, tail coming out the bottom. Grab it with my 3 bottom fingers. And now I'm going to take the working yarn and go down below my finger, then up over. So I wrapped around 1 time. And now I want to wrap around a 2nd time. So it kind of looks like you have 3 loops going on. Now you want to take the 2nd loop, bring it up over the 1st loop. Take the new 2nd loop, bring that one up over the 1st loop. And now finally you want to grab onto this new 2nd loop and pull it off your finger. And when you pull it off your finger, it's going to tighten into a slip knot. Now take that slip knot and put it right onto your knitting needle. So here I have my US 7, because that's going to be what we use for the ribbing. And basically when it's on my knitting needle, I have the tail coming out the front and the working yarn coming out the back. So now I'm going to do the long tail cast on. And to do the long tail cast on, I'm going to grab it similarly to when I was just doing my slip knot. It also helps if you hold this stitch with your pointer finger. And now you want to take your pointer finger and thumb from your left hand and push outwards. So essentially you've created a little diamond shape. So your pointer finger is pushing back on the working yarn, your thumb is pushing towards you on the tail, and then you want to angle your hand upwards. So right now my palm is facing the ceiling. Now to do this long tail cast on method, you're going to bring your knitting needle towards yourself and under the wrap around your thumb, and then come up the center. Then go back to your pointer finger, go around that front strand that's on your pointer finger, pick it up, and then bring that strand back through the center that's wrapped around your thumb. Now I'm going to release with my thumb and then pick right back up on that tail with my thumb again. So that's my first stitch. So now to show it one more time, I'm going to grab my yarn with my 3 bottom fingers, push back on the working yarn with my pointer finger, push towards myself on the tail with my thumb, then I'm going to point my palm up towards the ceiling. Now I'm going to move the knitting needle towards myself and under the wrap around my thumb, and I'm going to come up in between that wrap, so right at the center. Then I'm going to go back towards my pointer finger, behind that front one around my pointer finger, so kind of in between those 2 strands, pick up that, and then take that right back through the wrap on my thumb. Release with my thumb, and now I have my 3rd stitch cast on. The slip stitch, or the slip knot, that one does count as one of your cast on stitches. Now I'm going to continue casting on until I have a total of 96 stitches on my needle. I've now finished casting on my 96 stitches, so I'm ready to begin magic loop. The way magic loop works is you want to divide your stitches in between the 2 needles. So I typically just slide my work over to the cord. And now pick, for this one it doesn't actually matter that I get right in between because I can always shift it later. So I'm just going to pick somewhere in the center over here. And now slide both of those halves that I just split it up into up to the top of my needles. And now I'm going to want to straighten everything out. So I'm twisting it so that all the cast on bumps are facing down. You want to make sure you don't have anything twisted over here. Okay. So now I have it in like my starter magic loop position. So every time you start a magic loop round, you're going to want your needle points pointing right and your working yarn coming out the back needle. So this is my working yarn right here, and I cut my tail a little bit just to make sure that I didn't accidentally start knitting with it, because I always seem to overestimate how much I need to cast on. So again, I have my needle points pointing towards the right, working yarn coming out the back needle, and here I have all my work coming down at the bottom. So essentially right now I don't really have any work, so it's just my little cast on edge is on the bottom. Now to begin this first round, since I'm doing magic loop, I can't actually place a beginning of the round marker. The beginning of the round marker is just if you're doing regular in the round knitting, so if you have like a 16-inch needle or something like that. So in this case, I'm just gonna have to remember that where my tail is my beginning of the round. And to start the magic loop, you're gonna wanna pull through the needle that has your working yarn attached to it. And when I say pull through, I mean pull towards the right. So basically you could begin knitting with this, but you don't want to pull it too far. You want to leave some of the cord over here on the left hand side, and that's that the stitches stay even between the two needles. And now you want to begin knitting with your working yarn into that first stitch. So since I'm beginning knitting, I want the working yarn coming out on top. I'm going to knit 2. Bring my yarn to the front and purl 2. Now I'm going to continue going all the way across this front needle, and I'll show you once I get over here how I then switch to the other side. So I'm now on my last stitch on that first needle. I'm going to work that, and now again every time I start magic loop I'm going to want my needle points towards the right, so I'm going to flip my work. And now I'm going to slide back in the needle that I just worked across. Make my work all facing down again. So now essentially I just set it up. So this is where I first joined. So you can see there's a bit of a bar, but that'll actually start to close up as we move up and up the needles. So now it looks just like that last time we set it up. So I have needle points pointed towards the right, working yarn coming out the back needle. So now I'm going to pull through the one with the working yarn attached to it. And now I'm going to continue working whatever you finished on the other side. So I finished with the knit 1, so I'm going to knit 1 more, and now work the purl 2. So that's exactly what you want to do every single time. So you want to have your knitting needles pointed towards the right. You want to have your working yarn coming out the back needle, and then you want to pull through and begin to knit with the knitting needle that has the working yarn attached to it, so your back needle. And the key is going to be to set that up every time. Now I'm just about to finish going across that second needle. So once you've gone across both needles, that makes up 1 round. So now we're back at where the tail is. That's my beginning of the round. So again, I'm going to point my needles towards the right. I'm going to slide back in the knitting needle. And now to set up again, I want my knitting needles pointed towards the right. I have the working yarn coming out the back needle. So I would just pull through the back needle and begin working, and this would be my second round. So anytime we're working the cable pattern and things like that, you're not only going to work the cable pattern on this front needle, you're also going to work it across the back needle. And that way that will make up one full round and we aren't getting uneven cabling. So now I'm going to continue working my ribbing for 1 inch, and typically I measure that from the bottom edge and then up until basically like the very bottom of the knitting needle. So this is for the no like folded brim version. If you do want to do a folded brim version, I would knit this ribbing for 4 inches. On this next round, to try and tighten up that bar that's created too, just make sure you're pulling that first stitch nice and tight. Here's my 1 inch of ribbing. So now the next step is going to be to increase my needle size and also place stitch markers every 16 stitches. Since I am using interchangeable needles, I could just take these ones off and put on my size US 8s. But just in case anyone isn't working with interchangeable needles, I'm going to show basically how I would increase my needle size here. So here I have my US 8s and it's just on a different cord. So instead of pulling through this back one, I'm going to just pull it through and then just hang it there, just to give me a little flexibility. And now I'm going to take the US 8 and just begin working into that front needle. There's my first 16 stitches, so I'm going to place 1 stitch marker. Second set of 16 stitches. Now there's my third set. So now I want to divide it up, so basically I have 3 sets of 16 on one needle and 3 sets of 16 on the other needle. So because I'm doing magic loop, I'm actually not going to place a stitch marker there because it'll be right where the 2 needles join, or are separated really. So now I do have 1 stitch left over because my work wasn't completely divided in half. So I'm just going to pull my needle basically so that stitch rejoins the other side. So now I have half my work on that US 8 needle and half my work still on the US 7. So I'm going to take my needle point from the US 7 one and slide it all the way through. So now basically I have my US 8 in the back and my US 7 in the front. So I'm basically set up for magic loop again, just right now I'm on 2 totally different cords. And now what I want to do is I want to pull through the back one, which is my US 8, and then just begin working into these stitches on the opposite side. And again on this side, I'm going to place my stitch marker every 16 stitches. Now that I'm close to reaching the end of my knitting needle, you'll see that the US 7 just kind of falls away, and now that needle is completely separate, and I have all of my work on this US 8. So now again I can just push my needles to the right, working yarn coming out the back needle, and all of my work can just come up forward onto these knitting needles. So there's my hat with my stitch markers placed. I just want to start off before I get into the details of this specific chart with how charts work for circular knitting. So each row is going to be 1 round. So you'll see in the main portion of the chart we have rows 1 through 35. So there's going to be 35 rounds. And then for each repeat it goes from stitch 1 to stitch 19. So in between each set of stitch marker we're going to have 19 stitches. And the way we get from the 16 to the 19 is through that increase row. So that's the first thing to note. So every single little box is going to be 1 stitch. So for example, this first box right here is a purl stitch, so I'm going to work that first. The other key is going to be how we read these charts. So all knitting charts for circular knitting are going to be read from the right over to the left, and then you're going to read it from the bottom up to the top. So essentially it's opposite to how you would read a piece of paper. But if you look at this and you put your hat next to it, it's exactly the way you look at your hat. So you start knitting and you knit from right to left. And then when you knit, the fabric comes out the bottom and then you're knitting up the hat. So you're knitting in the same direction here. So whenever it's a chart in the round, you're going to read from right to left across every one of the rows, and you're going to read from the bottom to the top as you're going up through each round. The next thing to note is how do you know when to knit and when to purl? So there's two colors in this chart. There's the gray and then there's the white. So the gray boxes are purl stitches and the white boxes are knit stitches. And since we're knitting in the round, we're only ever looking at the right side of the fabric. So for every single one of these rows, it's always gray is purl, white is knit. Now there are a lot of differences between circular knitting and flat knitting when you're knitting with charts. So all these things I'm telling you are just for circular knitting. Lastly is how do we tell how many stitches each one of these different patterns takes up? And what we do here is we just look at how many boxes each of these patterns takes up. So for example, if we look at this cable stitch right here, this cable stitch takes up 4 boxes. So you can tell that by looking at either the row above or below. So this cable takes up 4 boxes, so we know that this cable stitch is going to incorporate 4 stitches total. If we look at another one of these, so for example, this stitch right here, this box takes up 3 stitches, 1 purl stitch and 2 knit stitches, so this cable is going to incorporate 3 stitches. Now that I've finished increasing my needle size and placing my stitch markers, it's time to start using the chart. So the way this chart is written is first down here at the bottom, we have it's basically like an unlabeled row down here. And what this is it's basically just our ribbing pattern. So it kind of shows how the ribbing pattern should look in your knitting. So for example, first here we have 2 white squares. So those are both knits. Then we have 2 gray squares. So those are both purls. And then it keeps on going, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. And that takes us up to 16. So this right here is our 16 stitch repeat in between those stitch markers. And the way knitting patterns are written, you'll see I just started over here on the right, and then I moved towards the left. And basically the way this is written is the way it's going to come out on your knitting. So when you knit, we start over here on the right and we move towards the left. So right here we have our 2 knit stitches. Those are the first 2 knit stitches right here. Then we have 2 purl stitches. Those are my 2 purl stitches right in here. So that's just showing this first row. Now in this increase row, I have another symbol in here where it's inside a gray cell and it says MP. So if I look at my definitions of different things, this MP says make 1 stitch purlwise, pick up the bar between the stitch that was just worked and the one that is about to be worked, and purl into the front of that stitch. So each one of these is going to be an increase. So we're going to increase 1, 2, 3 stitches on this row. So now you'll see that the second row takes up a total of 19 stitches because we've increased those 3. For this increase row, the first thing it says is MP, which is make 1 purlwise. So in order to do that, I'm all set up for magic loop. So I'm gonna pretend like I'm starting magic loop. So I'm gonna pull through the knitting needle, my working yarn attached to it. And in this case, you're gonna want the working yarn coming out from below. Then you're gonna wanna pick up the bar with your left needle between the stitch you just worked, which is back here, and the one you're about to work, which is your next stitch on this needle. And you're gonna wanna pick up that bar. So this is my bar right here, from back to front. And then you're gonna wanna purl into the front of that loop. So this is why it's important that the yarn comes out from underneath, so that way we can purl into the front of that loop. Now, next on my pattern, I have 2 white boxes. So that means I knit 2. Two gray boxes, so I'm going to purl 2. Two white boxes, so I'm knitting those next 2. And you'll notice that all these knitting and purling is going to match up with the ribbing right below it. So I made one purlwise, then I knit 2 right on top of my knit ribbing, purled 2 right on top of my purl ribbing, and then knit 2 again right on top of my knit ribbing. Now I'm going to make one purlwise, purl 2, and then make one purlwise again. So I'm essentially increasing 1 purl stitch before and after these 2. So to show that make one purlwise one more time, I'm going to pick up the bar in between the stitch I just worked, which is over here, and the one I'm about to work, which is on my left hand side. With my left needle from back to front, and now I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and purl into the front of that stitch. Purl 2, do a make one purlwise again. It's easiest too to find that bar if you stretch out your work a little bit. So now I've finished that make one purlwise. So now I'm actually just going to work knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until my stitch marker. I'm going to knit 2. It was trouble deciding whether or not to focus on my hands or the cape or the chart, so I'm just gonna knit and purl down below here. Okay, so I just finished working that in between my first set of stitch markers. So now, keeping my yarn in front because I have to make one purlwise next, I'm gonna pass my marker, and now I'm gonna work that exact same repeat in between each one of these sets of stitch markers, all the way across this needle. Then I'm going to turn my work and work all the way across the other needle because that makes up 1 round. I've now completed that increased round, and the purpose of that increased round is that whenever you have cabling, it constricts your stitches from being able to stretch basically like horizontally, so your fabric becomes a lot tighter. So when you add in those increases, it basically makes the top of the hat an equivalent size to the ribbing, and that way you don't end up with like a really tight top to your hat because all the cable is going to pull everything together. So now that I've finished that increase row, I'm going to begin working row 1. So again, since this one is a circular pattern, we're starting every row from the right and working across to the left. So in this one, there aren't any cables again in this one. So this one we just have a gray first, which is a purl, then 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 4 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. So again, you'll see as you're working this row that we're just working into this, this foundation that already exists down here. So we made one purlwise, so that's going to be that first one that we purl. Then we have our original knit 2 ribbing, so that's our next knit 2. Then we have our purl 2 of our ribbing, that's our next purl 2, and so on across the row. So we're going to work this, repeating it on both sides in between each set of stitch markers, and then once we complete that row, we're ready to begin our cabling. Now, just to explain to you how these different cable symbols work, I'm going to go through this first cable symbol in the pattern. So this symbol takes up 3 boxes, so this is a 3-stitch cable because it takes up the 2 knit stitches and then a purl stitch. And I want to take these 2 knit stitches and move them in the front of my work over towards the left. And the reason I can tell the knit stitches will be in the front is because of what's the dominant color on this chart, or on this little symbol. So you can see that this white diagonal box is what's the main portion of this pattern, and then the gray is behind it. So sometimes you'll see a little line to make up the gray symbol going behind, or the purl stitch going behind. It's trickier to show them on the tinier boxes, so I leave it out. But yes, we want to take these 2 knit stitches, and then the white box is the main symbol here, and it appears in front of the gray. So that means we want to hold the knit stitches in front, and move them over towards the left. Now, just to show you an example, if it were the purl stitch that would be in front, it would look something more like this. So let's say I have my 3 rows again with my cable symbol in the middle. So just drawing this first row down here. So this is the 2 knit stitches in the purl. So I have knit, knit, purl. And then if I actually wanted to move the purl stitch in front, my cable in the center, I'd want the gray color to be the dominant color. So it would look like this, and then the gray would be shaded in, and the white would go behind. Okay, so now that we know which color we want in front, we have to figure out what stitches to put on the cable needle. So as we're working across, the first 2 stitches, since we work from right to left, that we're gonna run into are these 2 knit stitches. So we're gonna wanna take these 2 knit stitches and hold them in the front of our work because the knit stitches are going in front of the purl stitches. So I'm gonna take the 2 knit stitches, hold them in front, work the purl stitch from my left-hand needle, and then knit the 2 knit stitches from my cable needle. And that'll give me this symbol right here. So first on here, I actually had a purl stitch, so I'm just gonna work that purl stitch first. And now I want to move these 2 knit stitches left 1 stitch. So what I already have left 1 stitch is that purl stitch. So I need to basically move that purl stitch somewhere else so I can move those 2 knit stitches over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold these 2 knit stitches on a needle in the front. Then I'm going to work that 1 purl stitch. And then I'm going to work the 2 knit stitches. And what I've just done is I've moved that purl stitch over to the right and the 2 knit stitches over to the left. So that's this first symbol right here. Now we just have 1 purl stitch, and then we have another cable symbol. So this one, again, takes up 3 boxes. So it incorporates 3 stitches. And we want to move these 2 knit stitches to the left 1. And what's already in the place over here is a purl stitch. So we want to take that purl stitch and move it over to the right. So we're going to rearrange these stitches in the same way again. So first I actually have that 1 purl stitch, so I'm going to work that. Going to purl 1. And now I want to move these 2 knit stitches to the left. So I'm going to pick up my cable needle, hold those 2 knit stitches in the front, purl 1 from my left needle, then knit the 2 stitches that are on my cable needle. Now, next, it just tells me to purl 2. So I'm going to purl 2 real quick. Now, if I move over to the other side, we have another 3-stitch cable. So right here, you can see that instead now, it starts with a purl, knit, knit is what this cable takes up. And the gray is behind again, so the purl stitch is going to be going behind. And then I want to move these 2 knit stitches over towards the right this time, instead of towards the left. So to figure out which one I hold on my cable needle, again, since I'm working across the row from right to left, the first thing I'm going to run into is a purl stitch. And the purl stitch goes behind, because again, the gray is behind the white on this chart, or on this symbol. So I'm going to take the purl stitch, slide it onto the cable needle, hold it in the back, knit the 2 stitches from my left needle to make up this gray diagonal, and then purl the cable, or the stitch on the cable needle. So that's how we do the opposite. So in this first one, it was the 2 knit stitches going on the cable needle, holding those in front, And in this one, the first stitch I run into is the purl stitch, and the purl stitch goes behind, so I'm gonna hold the purl stitch on the cable needle behind my work. Slide the purl stitch onto my cable needle, hold it in the back, knit the 2 stitches, and then purl the stitch from my cable needle. And now you can see I've moved those 2 knit stitches in the front of my work over to the right. So now I only have to purl 1 more and then repeat that same cable again. Then I'm going to purl 2. So this is my first cable row. So I'm going to work all the way across this in between each set of stitch markers all the way around the round. And then you'll notice that after each cable row, there are no cables in the following row. So you'll see every time afterwards, you just work in pattern. So we rearranged our stitches so that we'd move that 1 purl stitch over towards the right. So now we have 2 purl stitches in a row, which are those 2 right there. Then we have the 2 knit stitches that we moved over towards the left. Those are our 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, and then again all the way across the row. So all the way up until row 6, we're just working these simple moving 2 stitches to the left and moving 2 stitches to the right. Also, if you ever forget what any of these cables stand for, they're all written out on the following page. So you can always look them up there. But I always find I can move a lot quicker when I just try and think intuitively about which way the cables are moving and which ones to hold in front and which to hold in back. So now I'm going to work rows 2 through 5. And then I'll come back and show you this different cable that's in row 6. Now this row 6 incorporates 2 different types of cables and 3 cables total. So first, the 2 on the outer edge are the ones we've seen previously, where we were working the cables in towards the center. So both of these are 3 cable stitches, or 3 stitch cables, sorry. And then this one in the center is going to be a 4 stitch cable. And I can tell it's 4 stitches because it takes up 4 of the boxes. And this one, instead of purling that other stitch, we're going to be knitting all the stitches because the entire box is white. Now, which direction are we trying to move the stitches here? And again, if you would rather just look them up on the chart, all of them are defined. But intuitively, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take the 2 stitches that are currently on the right, and we're going to be moving them behind to the left side. And then we're taking the 2 stitches that are already on the left, and we're moving them in the front towards the right. So the key here is figuring out which ones we want in the front and which ones we want in the back. So again, we want these 2 stitches that we start off with on the right to move behind, because basically you want to look at which one are the dominant stitches and which ones are coming out on the front. So these ones right here are going to be the ones in the front. And then this little diagonal line in the back are going to be the ones we're carrying behind. So first, let me work up to that point. So I'm going to do purl 3. Then I'm going to do a 3-stitch cable where I move 2 stitches, the 2 knit stitches onto a cable needle and hold in the front. Then purl the first stitch from the left needle, bring the yarn to the back, knit the 2 stitches from the cable needle, then I'm going to purl 1, and now I'm up to that location where I have the 4 knit stitches in a row and I want to rearrange them. So you want to take those first 2 stitches and move them in the back. So I'm going to slide the first 2 knit stitches, hold them in the back, knit 2 from my left needle, and now I'm going to knit the 2 stitches from my cable needle. And you can see in looking at it, those 2 stitches on the left have gone in front, and then the 2 stitches that started out on the right have gone behind. So it essentially looks just like what the picture is here, just in knit form. And now I'm going to finish working across the row. So I'm going to purl 1. And now I want to move these 2 knit stitches over towards the right. So I need to put that purl stitch on my cable needle and hold it in the back. Knit 2. And now purl the stitch that's on my cable needle. And now I'm going to purl across until my repeat. Then I'm just going to purl 1 more so it doesn't fall off. Okay, so that's this 4-stitch cable right here. So you can see this 4-stitch cable is repeated again on row 14, but on rows 10 and 24 up here, we have the opposite cable. So what this cable is telling us on 10 and 14, or 10 and 24, is we just want to do the opposite thing. So again, it's a 4-stitch cable, but we want to take these 2 stitches that started out on the right, and we want to move them in front to the left. So instead of moving these behind, we're moving them in front. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hold our stitches on the cable needle in the front of our work. Then we're going to knit the 2 stitches from our left needle, and then we're going to knit the 2 stitches from our cable needle. And that's going to create this opposite cable to the one we've just worked. So the key here is, where do you hold the cable needle? Do you hold it in front or do you hold it in back? For the one where we're moving the first 2 stitches behind, we're going to hold our cable needle in back. And for the one where we want to put the first 2 stitches in the front towards the left, we're going to hold our cable needle in the front. So that's the difference between these 2 different cables. So now I'm going to continue working up my cable chart until I'm about to begin row 29, because that's where the decreases begin. And these decreases are going to work in pattern, so we're going to keep our cables basically intact and continue the general pattern that's going on, but we're going to be decreasing at the same time. So I'll catch back up with you when I'm at row 29. I've now finished up through row 28, so I'm ready to begin my decreases. On the chart, there's a couple of different decreases, so there's actually 4 different symbols total. So first we have these gray boxes with the line slanting right, and these take up 2 squares, so those are both actually going to be purl 2 togethers. Then again on the next row we just have a purl 2 together. Row 31, we have purl 2 togethers at each end, and then in the center we have 2 different decrease symbols. So here first we have the white box, so that means it's going to be a knit decrease, and the line here is slanting towards the left, so it's going to be a left leaning decrease. So that's going to be a slip slip knit, and then right next to that we also have the white box with the slanted line pointing towards the right, so that one's going to be a right leaning decrease, and that one will be a knit 2 together. Up again here, we're just combining the slip slip knit at the beginning with the knit 2 together at the end. Next row we just have our purl 2 together, knit 2 together, purl 2 together. And then finally up here at the top we have a S2 KP. I'm not actually sure if there's a better way to say that, but essentially what this is a 3-stitch decrease. So I'll show you that one once I get all the way up there. But let's start off with this row 29 and these purl 2 togethers that we have in this row. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to work over to that purl 2 together. So I'm going to purl 1, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, and then get to there. So I'm at my first purl 2 together. So what you do is you bring the yarn to the front, and then you want to put your needle through 2 stitches at the same time as if you're going to purl them. Wrap your yarn around and pull through both. And now we want to slide both of those stitches off the needle. So we've just decreased 1 stitch, and now there's 2 of those purl 2 togethers in a row, so I'm going to repeat that again. My yarn's already in the front, so I'm going to put my needle through purlwise both stitches, wrap the yarn around, and pull through. So those are my purl two togethers. So now I'm going to continue all the way around this round, working those purl two togethers in with the rest of the pattern. I've now finished row 29. So now we've decreased 2 stitches in that row, and instead of 19 stitches in between each stitch marker, I'm now going to have 17. So now the next row I'm going to do is row 30, and the only reason there's a gap up here in between these rows is because it's difficult to get the pattern, like the boxes, to line up when there's decreases in them. So I just left a little white space in between so that it didn't get confusing. So here for row 30, we're going to cable and decrease in the same row. So we just purl 1, and then we have a left leaning, removing the 2 knit stitches to the left, a purl 1, another left leaning cable, a right leaning cable, a purl 1, another right leaning cable, and then a purl 2 together at the end. So I'm going to work across that row, and then once we get to this up here where we have the slip slip knit and the knit 2 together, I'll come back and show you how I'm going to do those. On row 31, I've now worked over to this first knit decrease. So I've done my purl 2 together, knit 2, purl 2, and now I'm ready to do my slip slip knit. So to do a slip slip knit, I'm going to take, I just did a purl, so I'm going to bring my yarn to the back. I'm going to slip the first stitch as if I'm going to knit it, slip the second stitch as if I'm going to knit it. Now I'm going to slide both of those back over to my left needle. And now I'm going to knit those 2 together through the back loop. So now I've just decreased 1 stitch, and this decrease is leaning towards the left. So let me show that one more time. So my yarn's in the back of the work, and I want to twist each one of these 2 stitches. So I'm going to slip the first stitch as if I'm going to knit it, slip the second stitch from the left needle as if I'm going to knit it, and now I want to pass them back over, and I want to make sure when I pass them back over that they stay twisted. So now I'm going to put my right needle behind my left needle and through the back of both of those stitches, and now I'm just going to knit through there and slide both of the 2 stitches off my needle. So that's a slip slip knit. And now the next one is a knit 2 together. So to do a knit 2 together, you're going to put your right knitting needle into the front of both of those 2 stitches together. So I'm going through both stitches, wrap my yarn around, and now pull through and slide both of those stitches off the needle. So you can see at the top there, this one leans towards the left, this one leans towards the right. So now I'm going to continue going all the way across the round, repeating all my decreases throughout this pattern. So for example, right here, I'm going to do a purl 2, knit 2, and then purl 2 together to finish off this one repeat. And now that I've shown you all the decreases that are involved in rows 31 through 33, I'm going to catch back up with you once I'm on row 34 to show you these 2-stitch decreases. I'm now going to show the 2-stitch decreases that I'm going to be using in rows 34 and 35. So the 2-stitch decrease happens 2 times in row 34, so in total every repeat we're decreasing 4 stitches, and then finally it happens once in row 35. So in order to complete this decrease, I'm going to put my right needle into 2 stitches as if I'm going to knit them together. So there's 2 stitches there, and I've just put my knitting needle through both of them. But instead of wrapping my yarn around, I'm just going to slide those both off the needle. Now I'm going to knit the next stitch from the left needle. And now the last step is going to be to pass those 2 slip stitches together up over that knit stitch and off the needle. So now there's only 1 stitch remaining, and it should look like kind of your cable continues up and right into that stitch. So now let me show that one more time. but first I have to do that knit stitch in the middle. So here's my decrease again. I'm going to put my right knitting needle into 2 stitches as if I'm going to knit them together. Slide them both off of the needle. Knit the next stitch from the left needle. And now I'm going to pass those 2 stitches that I slipped up over the one that I knit and off the needle. So now I basically have 3 stitches left in that repeat. And during this round, I'm also going to take off my stitch markers. So now I'm going to repeat this pattern of 3 different types of stitches. So the 2 stitch decrease, knit 1, and then another 2 stitch decrease all the way around this round. And then finally on my last round, I'm going to work together each of those 3 stitches and turn each one of those 3 into just 1. The final step after finishing all the decreases is going to be to take the tail of the yarn and weave it through each one of these last 6 stitches. So I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving about 8 inches, thread it through my tapestry needle, and then the direction I go is, so this is the stitch I just worked right over here. So the first one I'm going to go through is going to be basically the first stitch I would have knit through on the opposite side. And it is easier to slide the tapestry needle through each one of the stitches when the stitches are down on the cord rather when they're up on the needle. And I actually like to go around 2 times just to reinforce it. Now that I've gone through, I can pull my knitting needles out. And if you're gonna put on a pom-pom, you can use this tail right here to attach your pom-pom. Or what I'm gonna do here instead is I'm gonna weave this to the inside, or thread this to the inside, and then weave it in. To create the double brim feature, you're gonna take your hat and inside it out, and now you wanna fold this brim of the hat in half. So right here is my beginning of the round, and so just to take this knit section right here, these 2 knit stitches on the inside, they're purl stitches. So I want to take those 2 and I want to line them up on the inside right where they match up to. And once I get them there, you can use kind of whatever you can find to hook them together. I like to use these little removable stitch markers, and I'll just put it through both sides of the fabric. And then I'll go over a little bit. So I'll take this knit section, figure out where it lines up to, fold it in half, and then again, kind of like I'm pinning for sewing. And I'm gonna go all the way around the hat, matching these up. And then, once I've done that, I'm gonna use this tail and I'm gonna sew these 2 pieces of fabric together. So just thread your tail with a tapestry needle and go around and sew the brim to the inside of the hat. And what holding it in place in all these locations does is it ensures that your brim doesn't become twisted anywhere and that you don't end up with like a big clump of fabric at the end. So these little pins basically just help you line it up all the way around the hat. Here are my 2 finished hats. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more knitting content.